Hello and welcome back to the Arsenal Bite Size Podcast. I'm your host Clayton, and we're back with another little recap. We were intending to cover the victory against Leicester, the obvious defeat against West Ham, and previewing the Forest game. But I think with the nature of how the weekend went, it's going to be dominated a lot by the West Ham game. But to do the recap with me, delighted to welcome back Simon to the pod. Simon, how you doing?
I'm good, mate. I'm all good. Disappointing result at the weekend, obviously. Kind of feels a bit of a somber mood compared to I think when we last spoke. So yeah, shame.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a very emotional person and a very emotional football fan, and I think for me the concern on Saturday when I was in the ground and it was mostly after the red card, I just felt like a numbness and this kind of apathy, and I was resigned to the fact that we weren't gonna get a result and B, obviously the title being done. And I think I was already in the camp of the title being done anyway. But for me, the sadness was I was sat in my seat and I felt nothing. And there were, there's things in games that should get you out of your seat. There's 50-50s that should like spark a bit of a I felt dead. And I think that, yeah, it hit me hard on Saturday, to be honest, to the point where I always make a day of it when I'm over at the Arsenal. I always see my mates and stuff. And I just went straight home and I ended up playing pro clubs with my mates from 7 p.m. until 2 a.m. And that was my way of kind of getting over it. So I'm feeling quite low today, to be honest. But one of the things I did want to touch on, I know we said we were going to cover Leicester, and I don't want to spend too long on that because that feels like it has dated. But one of the positives I think out of that was Ethan Nwaneri's performance, and I think the rest of the season is perhaps going to be on focusing on some small positives in what may be quite a mediocre end to the season. And yeah, going into Leicester, I think there was a lot of uncertainty, right, about what we do with the striker, and he rolled out the front three of Trossard, Sterling, Nwaneri, and yeah, Nwaneri's performance. I mean, I don't know if you were at that game or if you're able to watch it, but what do you think that performance from him can contribute for us for the rest of the season? Or is that something like a rare moment of joy in a season that is going to pan out to be quite tedious now?
Yeah, I thought he was really good. I was at the Leicester game. And I kind of maybe was guilty of this, and maybe other people guilty of it. Like the actual first 70 minutes of that game was like really bad until Moreno came on and scored those goals. Like it was a nothing game. And we know how bad Leicester are. Like anyone who saw the Brentford game, they are a bad side. And Arsenal like really struggled to create, other than Nwaneri, who was, it wasn't quite as exaggerated as when Saka plays, but it did feel like the solution was give the ball to Nwaneri and see if he can do something. And yeah, he was brilliant. And he has been probably one of the biggest plus points of this season. I think the way he's been blooded in. I think also in the sense like how good he looks on the right flank. Like I don't know what you think, but I don't think doesn't change my view that Arsenal need to sign a wide forward. But I would possibly think, I know a lot of the time it's been like, let's get a backup for Saka. I'd now almost think like, I should probably rather have someone on the left who's really going to upgrade you and be at that sort of like, in your first 11 level. And then on the right, I think if Saka was out, I think you could probably make do with Martinelli or Nwaneri. Like, I think there's enough there. And that would maybe change my mind a bit on the forward line. I don't know what you think in terms of seeing him on that right flank, in terms of, for so long, it feels like we've spoken about a Saka cover, but now maybe actually it's that left which you should strengthen.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never really been in the camp of Saka backup, Saka backup.
Mm.
I've been in the camp of needing and wanting a top class left winger for a while now. And I think you look back to when we were trying to sign Rafinha, right? Like I don't know what the plan was there in terms of what we would have done on the right, but Rafinha's ended up playing on the left for Barca anyway. And the way I look at it is Trossard and Martinelli, in my opinion, for the standard we want to be, are good to average. They're not top quality. And I look at that left wing spot as that is the way we can completely take it up a level. Almost like when Jesus first came into Arsenal, he was transformational in terms of what he did in the attack. And I think a left winger could have that impact. And that's where I'm similar to you, to be honest. I'm comfortable with Nwaneri there. I almost think, like, I know he's come through the academy as like a 10, right 8, but I almost think for this stage of his career, playing on the right wing really suits him. And like you say, it wasn't as exaggerated as Saka, but it was a clear plan A to still funnel everything through. And I think the one thing I really like about him is everyone talks about that kind of Iron Robin thing he's got where he cuts in, but I don't think that's his only move. He does feel relatively comfortable and competent going on the outside as well. Obviously in the Leicester game, there was that one where I can't remember if it was the right-footed shot that hit the bar or the post, but it was one of them.
Yeah, his right foot when he took that on. Yeah, he does seem more two-footed than people I think give him credit for.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that game, you're bang on. Like, there's a lot of parallels, I think, from that 70 minutes to what we watched against West Ham, to be honest. And I think this is where I've been speaking about for years. Like, football analysis is so outcome driven. And don't get me wrong, after we beat Leicester
Yeah.
2-0, I was buzzing. But like, when it came to kind of analysing the game, I was like, oh, there's some question marks there. And like, that's Leicester, who I think are probably the worst team in the league. They haven't scored at home in how many games now? So yeah, I think there was a concern there. But one of the positives from that day, again, like rewinding the timeline, was Merino, right? So he came on. Obviously, everyone knows what he did. Scored 2 goals. The fans, the away end, was singing his name, which was great. I was playing Kingston Town all week after it, and like vibes were good. And then you kind of go into West Ham, and I mean, was there any doubt in your mind in terms of what the front three would be? Because I was umming and ahhing whether he'd go for Sterling again to just build him up some confidence in the
Yeah.
home game. I did think Calafiori would start actually, but
I didn't think he was going to start Merino. That was my feeling. I just thought I kind of wondered with Sterling that, you know, his confidence I think looked quite shot against Leicester. And he looked pretty down. And I just wondered, I was thinking from a perspective, I was like, if you drop him for Merino, you know, you've got 3 fit forwards and you don't want to play one of them, the kind of message that sends, I think, is quite brutal. And I just wonder whether maybe you put Sterling as a sort of false 9 or just try and find something to get something, because you need him for this period. And I just thought, I don't think he'll drop him because of that. And then someone else said to me, but like, you know, Arteta is ruthless, isn't he? If he thinks that's the best team, he will just play it. If he thinks Moreno's up front, he's just so ruthless. So he's not going to think. He's going to think, I want to win, and this is what's going to get me to win. So maybe that's what I thought. I thought Sterling might have played, but watching back the game, I don't know. I don't know if it was so much an issue of Moreno, more just kind of chance creation or creating opportunities for him. Like, he seemed like he did a sort of fine job, but it's just, I wonder whether there's that debate whether if you'd had Moreno on that bench, is that kind of something a bit different to bring on? Maybe that would have been more preferential, but it did kind of shock me a bit. I mean, what was the mood in the ground? Like, what were sort of people thinking when they saw the team? Would you think they were happy to see him in there, or?
The vibe I got was that, yeah, I think to be honest, I don't know if it's influenced by the people I sit around, but a lot of the mood around where I sit is hatred towards Sterling, and I think a lot of that is kind of being Chelsea and that kind of tribalism and stuff. But like that, yeah, the people around me are very vocal about how they feel about Sterling. But even like when I'm in the concourse and stuff, I think this is the one thing I always struggle to differentiate between like the noise on Twitter versus what the kind of in-crowd people think. And I think everyone seemed like, yeah, that 11 seems great. I personally was quite happy to see Calafiori in the team as well. I know he didn't play amazing. And then did he ended up getting subbed? I can't remember if it was him that went off for Lewis-Skelly or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, like before kickoff, I was quite happy with the team. And yeah, the people around me seemed happy with it. But I think that's the thing. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, I think, with what we do in the attack at the minute. And that's we've seen now 2 games where we've struggled to create and score anything with Merino starting up top, and we've struggled to score and create when it's been the false 9 with Trossard, Sterling, Nwaneri, and it's like, oh, that's quite concerning considering we're going to have to rely on that for a bit. But I think one thing I'm curious on is I was obviously there. I've not made an effort to watch anything back. Like I always watch highlights and stuff, but I couldn't do it to myself this weekend. What you rewatched it without the emotion of watching it live. Were there any takeaways that you think caught your eye or your head watching it back?
Yeah, I mean, the thing was, it just wasn't. I mean, when I looked back at the stats afterwards, it was like 20 shots on goal. And then I kind of watched the game and I was like, was there 20 shots? I mean, they kind of were, but there weren't like any sort of massive, huge chances. And, you know, and like, again, I kind of feel like it's been a case for a bit. I didn't feel like Odegaard had his sort of best game. And then I saw a stat on Twitter just before I came on here that I think he had like the most chances created this week of any other player in the Premier League. Like 4 chances created again. And I was like, really? Did I see that? And I think what it was is that they were kind of like, you know, politely knocking on the door rather than absolutely taking a sledgehammer to it. Like, I didn't feel like Areola had, like, you know, some of those teams come to the Emirates and they get that win. You're like, oh God, that keeper in a mad game. I was like, Areola didn't really do that much. Like, he wasn't really tested. I thought Potter got his tactics pretty spot on with, 3 physical centre backs against Moreno, and I guess that's probably, I think Potter said afterwards they thought Arsenal would play Moreno, and that probably why you went for that team. But yeah, it just felt like, I don't know, ball speed, chance creation. I think Arteta was quite blunt and correct afterwards, where he's like the standards weren't good enough, and I think that was it. You kind of watched it and you're just like, yeah, it's just not. It's nowhere near the sort of level. Even with those players, you should put in a better performance than that. And yeah, it just didn't. I think West Ham were good, but it didn't feel like the sort of backs to the wall. When I saw the stats and it was like 20 shots on goal, 68% possession, 1-0 West Ham win, I was like, all right, I feel like I've seen this game before. And then I watched it and I was like, they weren't really like, defending for their lives. They were kind of fairly comfortable.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I just checked, so you're right. It was 20 shots, but it was only 2 on target. And I mean, there's similarities to the game when we lost 2-0 to them at home, right? But I think in that game, I actually felt like we were creating, and I felt like we were knocking on the door. In this game, you're right. It was so passive, and it was a painful watch from us. See, honestly, and I think one thing that does my head in is when, I mean, the atmosphere was so flat. It was absolutely awful, but I kind of expected that. But then the thing that does my head in is when the players do the whole waving to the crowd, and like, I get it, but it goes both ways. You kind of need to generate some decent football
the
to
players
get
set the atmosphere, don't they?
I think so, yeah. And like, there's definitely an element in the control of the supporters where we can proactively get behind them and stuff. But it's hard to get yourself up when what you're watching is turgid. And I think there's been a theme for me in a few games. Like, I was going to say just this season, but I feel like it's been longer than that now, where the intensity and the intent and the purpose from the goalkeeper through the thirds is so passive, and I don't get it. Like, I get it. They want to control it. They want to wait for the optimal time to attack and stuff, but it's quite painful to watch sometimes. And it's the way Raya will go to Saliba. Saliba will then go back to Raya. Raya will wait 5 seconds before he then makes the pass that was obvious anyway. And I don't understand what's happened. And like, I don't want to over-index because obviously we've seen us perform amazingly last year for a sustained period. We know what we've been up against this year. But what you said there about Arteta's post-match presser, I loved it, because I think I've fallen guilty of falling into the camp of, we've been so unlucky with injuries, red cards and stuff. But you're right, with what was available, we should have been putting in a better performance like that than that. So I guess the question now is, what I mean, we spoke about this before we went live, right? Is it a case of looking what's below us rather than looking ahead now? And do you think that is officially the end of the title challenge, if you can even call it that?
It does. I feels like the title's gone. I think. I mean, it was even after the Villa game. I think there was definitely more optimism. But I always just thought, I've always thought Liverpool would drop points, but I just thought Arsenal were going to drop points as well. That was always my
me too.
Fear. And I thought Wenger, there was a great bit with Wenger on beIN Sports where he was kind of talking about it, and he was like, "Oh, I'm praying, but I think I need to get better at praying." And it was just like the actual.
Was that this weekend? I've not seen that.
I think it was last week after the Villa game when he was talking about it, and it didn't feel like this team would go on a run. And I say that after just done 15 games unbeaten, so maybe I'm wrong, but it just didn't feel like it had that kind of ability where they're just going to go churn out wins.
Yeah, and I think that 15 games unbeaten came with Havertz in and around it, right? So like the sample size of no Havertz, Saka, Martinelli has been Leicester, West Ham, and we touched on it already. Leicester required 20-minute emergency backup plan from the bench, and West Ham, we never looked like we were going to score. And you said it earlier, like Merino was fine. I do feel like his movement actually I thought was pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, I was quite impressed by his movement, to be fair. I know we couldn't find him, but he was making the right runs, and I think that's something.
He was the issue. Like, really, I wouldn't have.
Exactly, and that's where I want to go with it. Like, there's been a lot of. I know you said about the stats around Odegaard, but like that. I know stats are evidence, but the game I watched with my eyes, I was really disappointed with him. And I feel like there's been a few games this season where I always say, I feel like he's far too comfortable playing outside of the block. So like you spoke about West Ham's structure. I think you're right. Potter got it spot on, but like they've got the line in midfield. They've got the line in defense. Ideally, I think you want an Odegaard in between those two. And I just feel like he's a little bit too comfortable to just play in front of everyone now. And you can predict everything you're going to see. Odegaard will get the ball to Timber. Timber will go back to Odegaard. They'll play it to whoever's on the right. It will go back into Partey, and it circulates. And I just feel like it's. I mean, what do you think that is? And do you even agree with that? I guess
Yeah,
takeaway.
the Odegaard one is so sort of interesting. And I was sort of talking about it today to someone at work because Gary Neville sort of, I don't know if you saw, but he basically said, "Oh, you know, he was saying Arsenal have been quite turgid and difficult to watch," which I actually agree with this season. But his sort of reasoning was, "Oh, because they've become obsessed with set pieces. That's what the sort of." Whereas, which I don't agree with. I think it's actually completely wrong. I think the issue is just like the attack has been so decimated, and also they've not strengthened. I think that's led to the football not being what it was. And it's hard with Odegaard to work out, is it because he's missing 3 forwards ahead of him and he hasn't got people to create with, or is he struggling himself to have the influence that he usually does on games? Like, and I was looking back at some of his old numbers today, and that the first title race season, so 22-23, he scored 15 league goals.
Yeah.
He's got 2 this season. And even last season, he got, I think, 8 goals, 7 assists. Like, his influence has just massively dwindled. And I don't know if that's because he's dropping deeper to try and get involved. Last season, it was noticeable. I think he was definitely dropping deeper. But it feels like they are not getting enough out of him, whatever the issue is. And if I knew the answer, I'd be on Mikel's backroom stuff. But something's not right there. I don't think that he's not having the influence that he should. And my instinct is to say I think he's struggling from not having the players around, like particularly Saka. Obviously, we know the relationship. But in this period, I think he's getting a lot of attention, and it's quite interesting. I don't know what you can tell me what it's like in the stadium among the fans, but on social media, he seems to almost be the kind of lightning rod for criticism. I don't know what sort of around you in the seats it's like.
I definitely agree on the social media front. Like, I've really minimized my social media usage just because it's not good for my mental health when Arsenal are not doing well. And every time I go on there, he is, like you say, he's the lightning rod for criticism. But I do think a lot of it is justified personally. And in terms of in and around me at the stadium, no, I don't think there is many. But I must say, myself, I've been really disappointed in him. And I agree. I think there's definitely an element of the who can he play in ahead of him. But then you see, I noticed this from my seat in the ground, and then I saw the clip of it doing the rounds on socials on the weekend when was it Trossard maybe that had the ball on the left, and there was a gaping hole which should have been for Odegaard to attack, and he just kind of peeled away to the side. And again, I've seen a lot of people paint that in different narratives and stuff, but the thing that did my head in was just a simplistic mindset of there is space there, attack it. And I always say I think especially wanting a certain number 9, there are strikers and attackers that make runs that inform where someone else has to pass the ball. And I think that's something that really pissed me off from the weekend. So in terms of criticism towards him, I think it's absolutely fair to want more without going overboard. But I think this is my thing. Like, and I don't know if you want to have a chat about this as well, like in terms of single points of failure in the squad. Like, a lot of people, I think, again, I've seen on the socials, they're talking about, well, we need to sign Wirtz and replace Odegaard. Like, I'm not quite there. But I would like to get to a point where we're not reliant on one player in any position, regardless of hierarchy. And that's one thing I really liked Arteta subbing Rice. Like, I thought Rice was better than Odegaard, but that's not to say he was good. But I just liked that. Like, it doesn't matter the price tag, the stature you are. Like, I liked that it was a proactive solution to put someone else in Zinchenko finally in midfield that we haven't seen for a long time. I know a lot of people have been calling for, but I'd love to get to that stage with everyone where it doesn't matter who you are, you're capable of being hooked. And I know we're kind of wafer thin at the minute in terms of the squad, but where's your head at in terms of his position? And do you think it's something that we can look to proactively improve on, or is that just...
No, I think they need more attacking. Certainly in that number 8 role, I think they need more attacking creativity. I mean, even if you just look at the summer, I mean, you lost, I'm not his biggest fan, but, Fabio Vieira, you lost from there. Smith Rowe, you lost from there, and you replaced him with Merino, who's not that type of player, is he? He's not a creative player. And Nwaneri, who was only 17 and hadn't really played first team football. I feel like you need another creative player in there, I think, just when things aren't going right. It certainly feels like with the structure of that midfield, Arteta's preference is your sort of number 6, then your kind of tall, powerful number 8, which has been sort of Xhaka, Rice, and then your creative number 8 on the right. I just kind of feel like when you're sort of chasing games or things need to be different, is there a way where you can have, 2 creative players there? And I mean, Merino came in for a lot of stick in the sort of first half of the season. And I actually went back and looked at his numbers, and basically he was basically doing what Arsenal signed him for. Like, he was all the aerial duels, he was near the best in the league, sort of tackles. Like, he basically is the player Arsenal thought he was. And my sort of argument in the piece was, well, your anger should not be at Merino; it should be at the club for signing him. Like, if it was me, I would have signed like an Eze. That would be my left.
Me too.
8. That's the kind of player I would love to have there. Eze and Odegaard, and you go and win it. But it doesn't feel like that's what Arteta wants to do. And one of the interesting things, I think, when everyone is fit, is when you're looking at how do you get Nwaneri, Odegaard, and Saka in a team. Is there a way where you could have, Nwaneri and Odegaard as 2 number 8s? Imagine the creativity you've had there. But I do feel like in that number 8 position, I think they need more than Odegaard, because either when he's not playing well or if he needs support, you need to be able to change it up. And I think a lot of teams know that, like, right, if we can just go for Odegaard, stifle him, we're going to sort of stop the attack down. Whereas you look at, City in their pomp, they used to have, Gundogan, De Bruyne, Foden, all these players there. I think they need more options there, and it's probably been exacerbated because of the number of injuries. But for me, I look at that area of the pitch, and I just think there's not enough creativity there. There's no depth beyond Odegaard. With Nwaneri, maybe a bit, but not the levels you need.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, and then what you see is we don't have anything other than a plan A, like what I speak about in terms of our attack. Like, I think the way we play against 80% of the teams, it will get us a win. It's fine. But we've started to see themes now over the last, I think maybe 2 years, where I can't remember if it was Everton or Newcastle that did it first, but that kind of mid-block, low block, where we really struggled to break them down. I want to say it was like January, February 2023, maybe. But there's themes now where I think against teams like Newcastle, Everton, Aston Villa sometimes play that way. West Ham did it successfully. Like, that is what we struggle to break down now. And I agree. I don't think the solution to that is a profile of a Mikel Merino. And I think that is you need someone else like an Odegaard who has the profile and the technical ability to play within the lines, unlock a pocket. And that's why I also want a left winger to be the upgrade as well, because you look at a couple of Nico Williams goals from the weekend, and it's the way he drove in from the left, go into central areas. I just don't think we have that ability. And so my concern is, I think there is a template on how you stop Arsenal, and I don't think we have the solutions in-house to deal with that. And it'll be interesting I think that's why part of me really liked the Zinchenko sub. Even if it didn't work out, it was an attempt to try something different. But yeah, there is concern for me there. And I think if I can summarize the topic of Odegaard with what you said there, like, it's not me wanting to force him out of the team, of course, but what you said there about Man City and their pomp, like, all of those options you said, and there were more, like, that's where I want to get to. And I know the way they were able to build their squad is obviously the elephant in the room, but like, I think it is possible to build a squad in a way where you do have the option to play players in certain positions that give you different things. So that's where I'd love to get to, where we're not reliant on one player, because every player has a bad day.
Yeah, it just feels like, and it's worse because of the injuries, but there's not loads of options to change the game when you're looking to do it. And West Ham was, particularly bad. Like, you're bringing on 2 left backs as your first subs to try and mix things up, but there doesn't feel like there's loads of different ways to play at the moment. And going into the summer, that for me would be top of the list. Like, if just 2, I think 2 forwards would be enough. And if you get another creative midfielder in there, that'll make a difference. And it will be interesting. I do really wonder if he would ever look at thinking of having an Odegaard and Nwaneri sort of number 8s, because it was. I remember years and years ago when they signed Odegaard on loan, and it was during Smith Rowe's sort of that season when he'd come through and was having a great time, and he was asked, like, is this not going to damage Smith Rowe? Because you remember they were playing like a 4-2-3-1, and Smith Rowe was a 10, and Arteta was like, no, they could play together. Like, I could, a long term, he want to have 4-3-3 and 2 number 8s. So he'd obviously thought about it then, having those kind of players, and he's obviously shifting in his mind a bit. But I do wonder if there might be games where, particularly against that low block, who's going to be hard to break down, if you just say, right, we're just going to stack it with 2 playmakers on the ball there. We're just going to play Declan Rice. He can do all the defensive work, and then you 2 guys go win us a game. And if you've got 2 number 8s on either side of the pitch able to open teams up, I think it'll just change how you attack. Whereas now, like, I had to look at some numbers today for a piece, but like 45% of Arsenal's attacks are down the right flank.
Oh, wow.
That's in Premier League games this season, and that's more than anyone else. If you're an opposition team, you just know that is where it's coming. And admittedly, Saka and Odegaard are that good that often it breaks through, but I feel like it's got to that point where the attack needs to evolve and have a different point of difference from what it's got.
It's almost like you wish you could take elements of, for all of the flaws, the 2008 to 2012 Arsenal, where it's like Nasri, Fabregas rotating in pockets and just moving people in and around out of position. It's a bit unpredictable. It's like, and like you say, if you got someone like Declan Rice behind him hoovering it up, then we'll
even those Wenger teams, like I feel like Arteta, he hasn't got the option to do it at the moment. But I always think of those sort of Wenger games when he was chasing it, he would just be like, just gonna throw every attacker on. Let's just go for it. Whereas I don't think Arteta really does that. Like, it's not really his style to think like, just forget the formation and just go out there. And like, he'll keep thinking, no, let's kind of tweak it. And the football definitely hasn't been as enjoyable to watch this season. And it's, I mean, even I think the most enjoyable season, where maybe because of the sort of unexpected nature of it, was that 22-23, where, I don't know, maybe teams were a bit not sitting as deep against Arsenal. They're a bit more happy to be open up. But that kind of style of football there, where it felt very free-flowing, feels different now, I think. And it's been a tough watch at times. And I do think like 12 league games to go, like what could these games be like to watch?
Yeah, I agree. This season has been painful in periods. And I think that there's the element of injuries, there's the element of red cards, but there have been some games where there's been no circumstances against us, which have still been painful. And I think, the summer's going to be huge in terms of, like you say, did you say, is it 12 games left for us?
12 league games, yeah.
I mean, what are, before we touch on Forest, there's a couple more things I want to look at from the West Ham game, but what are the expectations for the rest of the season? Because I must say, again, we touched on this before we went live, but when the Havertz news came out, my first instinct was there are going to be, again, similar to what you said, Liverpool will drop points. I think Arsenal will drop more points. And I think there'll be, even after West Ham, there will be more games like this. I think for me, when it first came out, my first instinct was looking at protecting what's below us rather than looking ahead. And I'm concerned, but what do you think the expectations are for the rest of the season? And obviously part of it will be Saka, Martinelli hopefully coming back. That changes things.
I don't know if it's too punchy to say, but does Wednesday and the result of that, if you win that game, you're kind of looking forward, and if you lose it, are you looking over your shoulder? I don't know. It just does. That Forest game feels very big all of a sudden. When they're second and third in the league and they're 6 points, it'll be 3 points. I mean, top 5 should get Champions League, shouldn't it? It'd be an almighty fall to go that far down. But I think it will be interesting. I mean, the title is, Arteta's not going to throw in the towel and keep going there, but within that squad, I do want, when it kind of looks like you'll be okay for top 5 in Champions League and you're not in the title, like trying to motivate that squad might be quite difficult, I think. I just wonder, just thinking there, when you've been in that race, and they're probably, they'll be thinking a lot the same. A lot of supporters thinking like, God, it's gone here, isn't it? And trying to get them up for it. Obviously, they'll have the Champions League still to play for, but I think that will be that could be a challenge. And the atmosphere we've spoken about, didn't we? But I mean, what's the atmosphere going to be like for those games at home if it's quite sort of turgid and the title's gone? And
I think the big games like Chelsea at home, I think, is the next home game.
Yeah, that's just before the break, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that will be fine. But then I'm looking at like
the run is actually like they'll have Forest away, and then they've got United away in the league and Chelsea at home, and then after that, you should hopefully be getting Saka and Martinelli back. So if you think you've probably got 3 more league games before you get those guys back, and the lift that'll give would obviously be quite a lot. I mean, particularly Saka, I think just the sight of having him around the squad and like on the bench, I think would be a lift. And United is probably not, say this feels like a good place to go and play given the sort of state they're in. I just think the way the season finishes is going to be interesting to see. I think how that mood is reflected both within the fans and the squad.
Yeah, I've got this horrible feeling that this season is going to peter out to a lot of nothingness.
Mm,
And I think the last 2 years, well, 3 years, like you said, the 22-23 season, there was that almost unexpected, oh, we're in a title race here. But I think we're going to see us get to March, April, and the league is well gone. Champions League, I don't know how much of this is maybe a bit uh like too much of an emotional reaction to the weekend, but I'm not bullish on beating PSV over 2 legs. If we play the way we did against
mm.
Leicester and West Ham against PSV, I don't think that's a foregone conclusion that we go through. I don't think we're going to beat Forest midweek. And do you know what? This will sound bonkers because this Man United team is probably the worst that there's ever been in my lifetime anyway. But there, and again, I don't know if this is like confirmation bias, but there's been periods in Arteta's reign where when we lose one game, we do have 2 or 3 that follow. And I remember in the year we were going for top 4, it was like, I can't remember if it was like Brighton, Southampton, but there was a sequence of 3, 4 games in there. It happened last year around December, and I can't factually or quantify why that is, but there's
Yeah.
this feeling in me where I would not be surprised if we see that again against Forest, and dare I say, against one of the worst Man United sides I have ever seen. And I don't know if I'm being too reactionary, but that's genuinely how I kind of feel in my gut at the minute, which isn't very nice.
Yeah, Forest away is just not the game you want. Forest away midweek under the lights is just like all the we know with the short turnaround. I was just thinking about that. It's just a game you do not want really, particularly when you're second and third in the table. If you're looking at it glass half full, you'll say, well, you know, you've got to be bang up for that. There's no way, like you can't basically go into that sort of feeling sorry for yourself because you will get rolled over. Whereas if it had been, I don't know, like a sort of Southampton at home, you could maybe imagine it like that. But yeah, there used to be a phase under Arteta which they kind of got out of, but they certainly in the early part of the tenure, they used to have this thing where they lost in bunches, like they would lose sort of 3-4 games in clusters, and they kind of kicked that habit a bit. But even last season, what impressed me was the way they also had that difficult week, didn't they, with the Villa and Bayern Munich? And I remember after that thinking like, oh God, this would be a real shame if this just like peters out, like they just end with a whimper. And they actually didn't. They actually got right to the final day and they were there in case City slipped up, they'd have won the league. And this time I kind of feel like it needs to be the same thing where you don't want to just end this season on a whimper because it will completely, going into the summer, the mood will be so flat. And I just think Liverpool, very unlikely they're going to slip up, but you need to kind of just stay there. You need, for your own sort of pride and mentality, you need to try and stay the fight as long as you can. And Forest away is like an absolute humdinger of a game to try and show you've dusted yourself off.
Yeah, just on the kind of staying in the room, like I agree. I think if we started the season with what's available right now, we'd all be talking about top 4 being the objective. I don't think any of us would be thinking of that. And I think that's where I just think, even like you said, it may only be 3-4 games with this until we get some of the cavalry back. But I still think because of that, we're just going to slip up, and then it will get to a point where it's too much to do. But yeah, you're right. Forest away is not the game you want. And to be fair, look, one thing about this group I don't doubt is that, what you said, like, I don't doubt whether they'll be up for it or not. My concern comes from tactically, everything we touched on about 20 minutes ago in terms of what this Arsenal side struggles against feels like the template of this Forest. I think even the intangibles, like the atmosphere, like you said, they'll be bang up for it. It'll be very St. James Park-esque, I think, in terms of the hostility and the environment and the atmosphere. And I think tactically, they will mid-block the shit out of us. they will make it very tight, very aggressive to play. They no spaces for us to occupy. And you look at Morgan Gibbs-White, Alanga, Hudson-Odoi, Chris Wood in the form of his life. That feels like a balance of they have the defensive strategy and structure to nullify us where we struggle anyway, as well as the power and the pace and the technique to hurt us going forward. And that just feels, for me, recipe for disaster. So is there anything based on how I've set that up that you think we can be confident in going to the City ground?
I mean, the only thing I would feel confident in is I feel like the centre back, Gabriel and Saliba up against Chris Wood, I think is a good sort of matchup. Like he's kind of feel like he's the kind of striker they would like to play against. Like he's not
Yeah,
like
they like a physical battle,
he's
don't they?
not an Isak who's going to be sort of slippery with his movement and off the ball and stuff. He is quite he'll quite happily have an arm wrestle with them, which I think will suit. My debate I was having is what do you do in attack? Do you play Moreno again
I
because he
think so.
actually did okay? And do you think, up against Milinkovic and Murillo, who are two big centre backs, you want your own big man to go up there? Or do you think, maybe you should play a Trossard because is that not what would they not like playing against a small false nine who's moving around and doing that? I mean, I think he'll stick with Moreno and go for that. But what do you think? Would you go like sort of fire with fire and play Moreno over two big centre backs, or would you rather have someone like a Trossard there?
If we had Martinelli available, I think I'd go for the false nine.
Yeah,
But I think because the knock-on impact means Sterling playing in the
yeah,
form he is, I think it just defaults into the same again, to be honest. But you are right, like especially with the centre backs, yeah, they'll like that battle. So it's not improbable, but yeah, I don't know. When I kind of think, I always try to, as much as I'm an emotional person, when it comes to thinking about football, I try to just put a very logical hat on and think, okay, how can I actually see this playing out? And it's not a good feeling, to be honest. But yeah, it's a Wednesday night game, and yeah, I don't know if Liverpool play Newcastle on the same day, but
yeah.
that'll be interesting. Same night, so yeah, that could be quite a swingy evening. But yeah, Forest have lost 2 in a row. Prior to that, they did smash Brighton. I think it was 7-0 actually, but
Yeah.
there was a stage on Sunday where they were 1-0 up, and then I think I went for a shower or something. I came out there 4-1 down. I was like, what? So
Yeah,
I
they've been
can't.
weirdly like a bit leaky, which is quite unlike them. But yeah, I think for Arsenal, the kind of we'll know a lot by the reaction to what they put in on Wednesday night. I think that will probably tell us quite a lot about how damaging that defeat was on Saturday, because it felt like it sucked the life out of the place. And how they respond, I think, will be quite telling.
Yeah. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is we're absolutely going to shit the bed, 10 is we're going to beat them 10-0. Where's your confidence level for the Forest game?
I would put it at a 4 out of 10.
That is very good. I mean, I'm a 2, so I think 4 is very good. If I always do score predictions weekly, and right now I think I'm 3-1 Forest. To be honest, I can see. I sound very negative. Like to be honest, I'm actually quite an annoyingly positive fan usually, but I always speak how I feel, and how I feel right now is exactly what I'm
Yeah,
saying. And I think, do you remember the year we were going for top 4, where Palace away, Partey went off injured, just got a bit battered, bruised. Newcastle Monday night a few years ago. It's got that vibe about it for me, and I think Wednesday like the midfield backwards is all fully fit. I just think we're going to look a little bit toothless going forward, and as a result, we'll get
yeah.
overwhelmed going facing the other way. So
And some
yeah,
rough games there as well. Obviously, years ago there was the FA Cup game,
I
which
was
was
at that one.
in the
Yeah,
documentary where Arteta went mad. And then I remember 22-23. That was basically that was where the title went at Forest when they lost 1-0, I think it was.
yeah,
The title had already basically gone, but that pretty much confirmed it. So yeah, they've had some rough games there, and under the lights. I know it's a cliche, but it is not ideal. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think from team selection wise, there's not masses he can really do to change it. It's kind of just trusting who you put out and go with them again. And the only good thing after that is at least there is a break to PSV, isn't it? You're not playing until the Tuesday. And that suddenly feels like a massive tie now, doesn't it? Like the Champions League, basically pretty much putting your eggs in that basket.
yeah, big time. Just before we turn to that, actually, you're right. On the team selection, there's not much he can do. And I think prior to the West Ham game, I was thinking Calafiori for West Ham, Lewis-Skelly back in for Forest, but he's obviously unavailable now. What was your thoughts on the incident? And from his own personal player development perspective, like do you think that, you work in media, do you think any do you think there'll be an impact on him personally at all? Or do you
He's got a very good group around him. His mum's I think it's
She's
quite
great,
fairly
yeah.
well known. Yeah, she's very, very good influence. I've interviewed her once before. She's great, absolute force of nature. So I think he's actually very sort of grounded kind of set, and I don't think it'll impact him too much. And in terms of the incident, it was a red card for me,
Yeah, me too.
just because of Rives. But I think if Rives in goal, I think I would have had a different view on it because his positioning's there. I know some people said maybe it's a foul by Kudus. Don't really think that's the case. And I have always thought there would be because he is so bold on the ball, isn't he? And he's so daring that and he's all very good at it, that they're probably going to get one of these sort of incidents. The hope I would have is that he doesn't stop doing that, because that's probably the best bit of his game. And then Zinchenko does that a bit, but Zinchenko, I always felt like there was one a game, whereas this is the first one we've had for Lewis-Skelly for 15, 16 games he's had in the team. That would be my thing. If I was Arteta, I'd be saying to him, obviously you made a mistake there. Maybe in hindsight, I don't know if Lewis-Skelly knows where Raya is or the situation thing, but I wouldn't want to stop him doing that from his game, because that is his best thing. His ability to wriggle past players, his body positioning is great. And this is just an instant where it just kind of happened. And as you say, it just iced the cake on a pretty poor day.
Yeah, I just want to echo what you said there, to be honest, because especially I'm training as a sports psychologist myself and do a bit of football coaching as well. And everything you've just said there is what we're kind of taught in terms of what we teach from a mentality perspective. And Arsene Wenger used to speak about this as well when bringing in youngsters. You need to expect them to make mistakes, because that's how they learn. And unfortunately, it's a process where if you want these elite level young talents coming in, you've got to take the rough with the smooth. And I think it's one of them. I completely agree with you. It's something that makes him who he is. And it's something that gives him the ability to contribute to us positively as well when he's driving through midfield and stuff. And yeah, it's different to Zinchenko, where, again, agree with what you said. It felt like one a game, whereas this is the first time. So it's one of them. I just thought, again, I've not watched it back, but from my seat, I was like, "Whoa, we got away with that one there." So yeah, without having watched it back, I did think it was a red from my seat. And yeah, I don't think it will affect him personally. It's just I'm a little bit concerned based on the kind of general media reaction after Wolves. But I've not been online, to be honest, this weekend to see what the narrative's been. But I do think that was a red, unfortunately. But like you say, he's got good people around him, and I'm sure he'll bounce back and be fine. On the Champions League, before we get out of here, PSV in the round of 16. What was the reaction for you?
From a work perspective, I was disappointed, because I've been to Eindhoven twice before. So very selfishly, I was a bit like,
oh, first world problems.
World sports violin and all that. I would have really liked to go to Feyenoord, just because it looks like an awesome stadium.
Yeah.
The atmosphere looks brilliant. There would have been the narrative with Van Persie, obviously, as well.
Has he officially gone in there then?
Today, I think he's literally been appointed today. Timber's brother sadly injured, so he wouldn't have had that. But yeah, that kind of felt. And I think, look, from what I watched of the Champions League games, they look like a worse side. I think Feyenoord's PSV. I watched after the Liverpool Villa game was that night. I flicked over to watch the end of PSV and all of extra time.
Yeah, I was watching that as well.
And I actually thought they looked pretty good. So I don't think that's going to be an easy tie. I know at home last season it was 4-0 to Arsenal, wasn't it? But away, that was the deadest of dead rubbers, wasn't it, last season, where the group was done. So yeah, but then the quarterfinal draw, assuming Arsenal get there, is Atletico, Real Madrid. Not that I would massively fancy Arsenal neither tie, but I think it's occasions like either going to the Bernabeu or Simeone versus Arteta for 2 games would be quite interesting. My concern for the Champions League is when Arsenal lost to Bayern Munich last season, after the tie, I think internally at the club and externally, everyone was like, they didn't really have Arteta called it magic moments, but that's someone off the bench in a really tight knockout game to come and win you the game. And now I'd look going into these knockout games, I'd be like,
we're in a worse position.
They've got even less of that. Yeah, they've got even less firepower for big games. When I was watching Madrid v City, I was like, they're so stacked up there. Just the amount of firepower they've got, and that'd be my worry for Arsenal. I think defensively, I actually think they're really nicely set up for Champions League. I think they're really good for those games, but they haven't got, I think, that killer in attack for a tight knockout game where you've got a really good defense and then you get bang one chance and you win it. So that'd be my worry. I think they'll have enough to get past PSV. I think also the second leg being at home, I think, is quite a big bonus. But yeah, it doesn't feel like as nice a tie as it was when the draw was made. But I don't know if that's looking through the lens of losing to West Ham.
Yeah, you've took the words out of my mouth there. I think I initially was like, okay, we're without an attack. We've got a combination of Nwaneri, Sterling, Merino, and who's the one I've forgotten? Trossard that we can use. That should be enough to get through PSV over 2 legs. But then again, I don't know if this is through the lens of what happened on the weekend. I'm now thinking, again, just based on the evidence I've seen, if we play the way we did in 70 minutes against Leicester and the 90 against West Ham, but I'm worried. I'm really worried. And again, I don't know if as a result of this weekend, my perspective has shifted, and all I can remember is the Olympiacos, the Sporting Lisbon in the Europa, and I don't know if that's now creeping into my head rather than some of the positives we've achieved in Europe, like Porto and stuff. So I don't know. I'm slightly concerned. I think I agree we should have enough, but if we're sat here in a few weeks' time talking about how we've been knocked out, it's heartbreaking to say. I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm being very negative today. It's just, I'm in a very down mood. But if we do get through, personally, I mean, both will be tricky, but the spectacle of watching my team at the Bernabeu would just be a bucket list thing. And I agree, like the way we're defensively structured and set up, never say never. It just feels like, do we have any ability to create a magic moment going forward? I'm not so sure. But yeah, watching us at the Bernabeu, I think would be a bucket list thing for me. But just, okay, so getting through PSV first.
Yeah, Madrid for me would be my...
Have you been?
Would be my pick. Real Madrid would be my pick.
Have you been to the Bernabeu?
I've never been. No, I've never been. And I've not been to the Wanda either. I've never been to Madrid, full stop. So that would be great. And I just think, yeah, there's something about playing Real Madrid Champions League. I mean, obviously, great memories of Henry, isn't it? And all those years ago. I mean, that attack is just insanely stacked. So I mean, it would be the most brutal game of attack v defense I think you've seen.
Yeah.
But
Raheem Sterling running down the wing at the Bernabeu.
The one thing what sort of hope is by that point you would have, Saka and Martinelli back, which would make a difference.
What is the timelines on that officially? Do you know?
Well, the Saka pictures came out, didn't they, when he was in Dubai working? The sort of word then was like March, April time. Don't really know. I think it's quite difficult because it's hamstring that they're like almost reluctant to put a set date on it because it could suddenly change where they don't want to rush him back, get him back. I think I would be surprised if they got, well, certainly Saka was back before the international break. Maybe that Chelsea game he could get back for. I think for him it was, I mean, you saw the scar. I'm sure everyone's seen the scar, but like it was, it was a serious injury that he did. And even though there's a desperate need to get him back, I just think the club are quite wary about like, you rush this guy back. It's a hamstring.
Need to protect his career, right?
Exactly, yeah. And the thing is, if he doesn't make that Chelsea game, which maybe, I don't know, might have been make the bench or something, Arsenal don't, that Chelsea game's the 16th of March. They don't actually play until April 1st because they're not in the FA Cup. So there's actually like another big 2-week gap.
Is there another Dubai break coming up?
Well, I don't know. Get back. Well, after Havertz, maybe Dubai's been banned. I don't know. And then Martinelli was like a minor hamstring. So that, I think, was always looked around a month. And again, would be sort of middle of March or after the break. So I think those will both be close. But I just think they're wary about, even though they desperately need them, when it's a hamstring, they're just like, if you rush these guys back and then they do something again or make it worse, even though you're desperate, I think they'll be reluctant to do it. But when they do come back, yeah, if you can get them back for that Champions League quarterfinal, will make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't. What do you think it would be like watching 2 legs of Simeone v Arteta?
Oh, that would be
like, it would remind me of the Porto game because Conceição is, I mean, something else. But to have Simeone v Arteta, I think would just be the ultimate sort of dark arts.
100%. But like, do you know what? I know we do it. I don't think we're as bad as everyone makes out.
No.
Like, I don't think we're quite Atletico levels. Like a lot of the neutrals,
because Arsenal weren't associated with it, that it almost stands out more. Whereas Atletico, it's like, oh, that's just Atletico. So like, it's kind of, they're way worse than other teams. I mean, I thought Porto were, I mean, remarkable for it over the 2 legs
Yeah. And
last
that
year.
manager, I mean, he is I don't want to
Oh,
use the word that
Conceição, yeah.
comes to the word that comes to my brain, I can't say out
Yeah.
loud. But
They
he is.
for the corners. Actually, they were probably the best team at dealing with Arsenal's set pieces because they were just 3 or 4 of them would just fall over, and one of them
Yeah.
would get a free kick. Like they were, and I mean, when they came to the Emirates, obviously they're 1-0 up from that first leg. Like the way they were slowing the game down, just they were at it non-stop. And I do think Simeone v Arteta would be quite a needly game, which would be interesting
Yeah.
to watch. I don't think it'd be quite the football fest that Madrid Arsenal would be.
Not at all. Just
Not
final
for the purists.
question. Look, you've just planted something in my head there based on, I forgot the Porto tie. We were actually 1-0 down. Like, based on what's available, how do you think we'll actually approach the PSV tie? Because it is away first, right? And
Yeah,
again, with what's available is the main thing.
yeah. I mean, I feel like the way Arsenal played in Porto, I wonder if that will be the sort of blueprint for it, where they were very. I mean, they didn't really go for that game very much, did they? They were kind of seemed very happy to go back with a 0-0. And you contrast that with the first leg of the Bayern Munich game, which I felt was
Yeah.
quite a
We were
crazy
quality.
open game.
Yeah.
It felt like Arteta suddenly was like, "Oh, let's go for a knockout blow in this first leg." So I think that PSV game will be kind of just keeping it as tight as possible, and then get yourself a draw, and then like right, we'll win at the Emirates. And the way this team is set up now, I don't know if the way you play for the rest of the season is kind of like, do you just set yourself up as like a defensive, like what is the strongest bit of this team now is the defense? Do you just set yourself up as like we're going to be a sit deep team, But I can't imagine an Arsenal team that just surrenders possession and sits deep and like hits teams on the counter. They don't really do that. But that's almost, if you were looking at it purely without any emotion and just from what you've got in the squad, would you be like, right, we've got great defense, good holding midfield, let's just sit deep and we'll hit teams on the counter attack? I don't know.
What you said, like you say, when you take the emotion out of it, it logically makes sense. I can't picture him doing that. The way he speaks, even he's very strong in his language. With like when I think one of the reporters asked him pre-West Ham is the title over. He's like, if you ask me that, I'd rather go home. Like he's very clear in his kind of
We've
beliefs and
seen
values.
games. I always remember the Carabao Cup game last season at West Ham. They were like 3 or 4-0 down, and he was just unloading the bench with like Odegaard, Saka, Rice.
Odegaard got injured from that as well, didn't he?
And everyone's like, "What are you doing? The game's gone. Just like it's gone. Just leave it. I think that's just his mindset that he will not let it go. And even with the title, I cannot imagine he's the sort of person who's like, "Oh, the title's gone." Really, like he's just
No.
That's just not his mindset, is it?
Not at all. But honestly, his presser post West Ham was one of my favorites. Like, and even to be honest, I do think he slightly conceded that it's over without saying it, just because I think the wording he said was like, "Oh, it's out of our control now." And I think, and I think when he said that, that was me thinking, I mean, I think it's over anyway. But him kind of admitting defeat.
I think he actually speaks better. I say this from a media perspective when things are going badly or they lose. I think he's a better talker. I think when they win,
Why is that?
I don't know if it's because when they win, he's almost just kind of happy not to say anything and just let the football do the talking.
Do you think you get more insight from him?
I don't know. I just feel like certainly from like a quotes perspective, he's far more emotive when they've like lost, and certainly immediate post match, he normally speaks better than anything. I think because he's got a bit of adrenaline and he's a bit more. But I always remember sort of there when the team was doing quite poorly, COVID Zoom era, and I remember one press conference where he was like, "My chest is here, fire the bullets, I'll take the bullets," like this kind of stuff, like really emotive, like strong stuff. And then it's sometimes very difficult when they're like winning and everything's going well. He just kind of flat bats everything and he's not really saying it. But I actually think when the team's doing poorly, I think he realizes there's a need to come out and kind of, say something and, this is our message, this is the viewpoint. And then the same, your perfect example is there is you as a fan, you see those quotes and read them and go, actually, yeah, I agree with that. That's exactly what I want to hear. And I think he does realize when things are going badly that he actually needs to kind of speak and say something. Whereas when they win, I don't think people mind as much what Arteta says in his post-match press conference. But when they lose and people are hurting, I think he does actually realise the importance of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I mean, I'm massive like Arteta in kind of person. I don't want
Mm.
to go down the Wenger in, Wenger out camps, but like if there is any divide, I love him, and like I'm going to do an episode separately in between the gap after Forest and Man United with one of the regular listeners, where we just talk about what our headspace is in compared to the narratives of Arteta. But as a leader, like I am so. It's funny what you say there about his pressers. I'm captured by every single one. I think
Mm.
he seems quite philosophical, and like there's the odd snippet that comes out which is like from the book of Wenger, I think, when
Mm.
the right question is asked, and like he's even said it before, his favorite book is the Daily Stoics, which is obviously based on Marcus Aurelius and all of that,
Yeah.
and like, I think he has got that element of like the Wenger philosophy in him, and I think he's quite poetic when he speaks sometimes, and I love like when there's insightful answers from him. I always feel like it's an ability for me to learn something as well,
Yeah.
so I always feel quite captured by him. Yeah, like I think the post-match West Ham one for me was one of my favourites, just because it was no. I think I've seen Ten Hag and who have all had injuries, and they've used it as an excuse. And me myself as a fan, I've fallen into that. We can't achieve what we want because of injuries, and I do believe that. But it was there's no excuses. The basics were bad. It's on me, and I just found that really refreshing. And I don't think you see that much these days.
No, he's never really liked the idea of using excuses. Like he's always been pretty clear on that. And I think that's the right thing to do. I just think it's quite like a. I'm trying to think if it was Ten Hag or was it Ange? I can't remember. Maybe it's Ten Hag. There was kind of one of the managers who was like talking about it, and I was like,
Ten Hag was
Ten Hag,
relentless for
and I
it.
was just like, it's like not a good look. I don't think when you're, especially when you're like a big club.
Yeah.
It's just like I don't think it's a great look when you're like sort of moaning about that kind of stuff, and I also don't think it kind of just washes very well. It's just like, yeah. So I think Arteta is good for that, where he doesn't really, very rarely makes an excuse about, I've had so many injuries or we didn't buy a striker. He kind of just says it, puts the blame on himself, and he also holds accountability to himself. And I noticed that in the press conference, it was about, he didn't say it was the players not performing. Put that was as much his responsibility as theirs. Which is something he does do.
Yep, agree. We'll leave it there. We're pretty much bang on the hour. But yeah, pleasure as always, Simon. Always good to chat. Hopefully the next time we speak, it will be a little bit positive, but we shall see. It's on to Forest, which is on Wednesday. And yeah, I'm not sure when the review pod will be. It'll be either Thursday or Friday. I think part of that will probably be dependent on the result and my mood. So
see how long the grief process takes.
Exactly, yeah. So keep an eye on the schedule. And then after that, in terms of content, yeah, like I said, there's going to be an episode at some point in the break between Forest and Man United where we just talk about Mikel Arteta, like where's our head at in terms of his management and the stage of the project, etc., etc. I think one of those where we just kind of take these are the narratives we're seeing on Twitter. Do you agree, disagree, and then talk? So I'm looking forward to that one. I think that'll be quite therapeutic. But yeah, pleasure as always, Simon. Thanks for coming on. And we will catch you on the next one. Cheers, everyone. Up the Arsenal.